Good morning from Washington, D.C., and welcome to the Wilson Center, America's congressionally chartered think tank. I'm Mark Green, President and CEO. Thank you for joining us from the U.S., Japan, or wherever you may be logging in, and welcome to this really important discussion on what's been called an updated approach to capitalism and on new opportunities for cooperation between the U.S. and Japan. We're excited to partner with the Office of the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida to spend the next hour exploring prospects for Tokyo and Washington to work even more closely together on issues of mutual economic concern. America's irreplaceable friend in the Indo-Pacific is Japan. Both countries are vibrant democracies, and both are committed to ensuring stability in the world's most populous and dynamic region. Both countries are at the forefront of promoting the rule of law and good governance. Our alliance is a cornerstone for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, our two great nations share a love of baseball. Never underestimate the importance of baseball. The US and Japan are also great friends in terms of the economic values that we share. Washington and Tokyo are committed to preserving the economic dynamism of the Indo-Pacific and protecting commercial interests in the region through open and mutually beneficial trade. The global pandemic has also made too clear for all of us that we have a shared interest in promoting the security and stability of supply chains that must not only be cost efficient, but also resilient to disruption and coercion. The two countries also share some common economic challenges at home. Fallout from COVID-19 has made some of the vulnerabilities in our respective domestic economies much more clear. In the US, financial markets have performed well over the past 2 years despite COVID, and many have benefited from that boom. At the same time, we've seen low-wage workers and others hit especially hard by the disruptions that have been caused by the pandemic. The challenge for democracies, including the US and Japan both, is for our economies to be competitive, to thrive, but also to work for all people. I would like to welcome Noriyuki Shikata, Cabinet Secretary for Public Affairs with the Office of the Prime Minister, and I look forward to hearing his views on how the Kishida government is reimagining the roadmap for growth in a post-COVID world. I'm also happy to welcome Catherine Monaghan, Director of the State Department's Office of Japanese Affairs, as well as Charles Freeman, Senior Vice President for Asia with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Yumiko Murakami, General Partner at Empower Partners. I'll now turn to the Wilson Center's own Shihoko Goto, Acting Director of the Asia Program, and she'll kick off the conversation for us. Shihoko, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador Green, and thank you all for joining us today. As the ambassador said, we're facing a lot of geopolitical uncertainties. We're still dealing with the global pandemic, which has caused a reevaluation of what it means to be economically competitive. We've seen a change in the regional dynamics and what it means to be resilient. And we've also seen a shift in economic partnerships and networks as well. And under those changing realities, I hope we can spend the next hour talking about what is Japan's economic vision under a new leadership? How can Japan's new roadmap for economic revitalization enhance relations with the United States? And what implications they have, not just for bilateral relations, but for the Indo-Pacific at large. It's a wonderful opportunity and my great privilege to be able to share the virtual podium with this fantastic lineup of speakers. I should also add that this is a live event, and so we are taking questions as we proceed. You can email us at asia@wilsoncenter.org, or you can tweet us at Asia Program. Again, the email is asia@wilsoncenter.org, Twitter at Asia Program. So let me first turn to Noriyuki Shikata, Cabinet Secretary for Public Affairs with the Prime Minister's Office of Japan. We've heard a great deal about Prime Minister Kishida's economic roadmap for Japan since he took office last autumn. Can you give us an outline of the Kishida administration's approach to capitalism and the Prime Minister's economic priorities moving forward?
Well, thank you very much, Goto-san and Ambassador Green, for the kind introduction. Good evening from Tokyo. Good morning to our friends in the United States. I'd like to start by explaining the background, the aims, and the pillars of the Kishida administration's New Capitalism initiative. Simply put, New Capitalism is a way to update capitalism, which is facing various challenges in the form of widening income disparities, poverty, or the growing challenge of climate change into more sustainable capitalism. At the same time, it is also intended for the healthy development of democracy by building a sustainable and healthy capitalism. In this regard, I'd like to describe how the Kishida administration's New Capitalism has points of overlap with President Biden's Build Back Better initiative. I would also like to touch on the importance of promoting greater cooperation and collaboration between the US and Japan in relation to these efforts. And accelerating a policy-oriented discussion is a priority. At the next Japan-U.S. summit, when President Biden comes to visit Japan, new policy initiatives to achieve a sustainable and inclusive economy and society will be a main topic of summit discussion. This will be in conjunction with the Quad Summit to be held in Japan in the first half of this year. So on the New Capitalism, as a result of excessive reliance of market mechanism, what we are seeing is a challenge of inequality or poverty, or the gap between the city and the rural areas, and the challenge facing the middle class. And we think that it is also very important to address climate change challenge. And these challenges posed by the current state of affairs surrounding capitalism could endanger a healthy and stable democracy. Around the world, there is a growing movement to revise our thinking about capitalism in order to preserve and restore democracy and prevent the descent into autocracy. The Kishida administration's new form of capitalism operates in the same context. In his double speech in January, Prime Minister Kishida called a great transformation of the economy and society toward a new era, while protecting the universal values of democracy. He added that his goal is to achieve the great transformation of liberal democratic society. And the emphasis on growth in New Capitalism is no different from Abenomics. Kishida administration's growth strategy calls for the following three areas. Number one, science, technology, and innovation. Number two, responding to climate change issues. And number three, digitalization. In particular, the main pillar is digital garden city nation concept, which will provide solutions for local and regional issues through the capabilities of digital technology. And in this process, investment in people, the importance of human capital is very clear. And briefly on Japan-U.S. collaboration, we wish to promote collaboration, bilateral collaboration in this area, which also could be in close collaboration with other like-minded countries, such as Australia, India, ASEAN, and Europe. And we can better achieve inclusive economic growth in the Indo-Pacific region, the creation of a free and open regional order, and the expansion of a sound and stable democracy. So this is something we wish to engage between the United States and Japan. And this agenda item includes issues like the climate change or secure and open connectivity in the case of digital infrastructure in the third countries. And we saw, Ambassador Rahm Emanuel arriving in Japan, and I understand that he's keenly interested in promoting urban or subnational cooperation between Japan and the United States as former Chicago mayor. So, of course, finally, I just should mention that Japan still has strong expectations for the U.S. participation in the CPTPP, which I cannot emphasize strongly enough. And we'll be engaging bilaterally in terms of the new idea coming from the United States in terms of the Indo-Pacific economic framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that great overview and setting the agenda and the priorities for the Kishida government for us. I know we have a lot of questions, and we have a lot of questions already coming in, but let me now invite Catherine Monaghan, Director of the Office of Japanese Affairs at the State Department, to share her thoughts on how the Kishida economic agenda will impact US-Japan relations and prospects for economic cooperation between Washington and Tokyo.
Thanks so much, Goto-san. Many thanks to the Wilson Center for hosting us today. The topic couldn't be more relevant or important. Thank you, Shigata-san. You made my case. We are so aligned. Unbelievable. Ambassador Green, Goto-san, fellow panelists, it's my pleasure to join you for today's discussion. I don't think I can start without saying something about Russia's recent aggression in the Ukraine, the commencement of an invasion, as our president has said. I think this is a great example of where there is no light between the US and Japan and the closeness of our relationship. We really have a meeting of the minds, a kind of a mind meld. Prime Minister Kishida's new capitalism and President Biden's economy for the middle class are only one example. The relationship between the two governments has never been closer. I can tell you Secretary Blinken and Foreign Minister Hayashi have an amazing relationship. They even talk about Beatles songs together. They're both musicians. It's amazing. And same with our president and Prime Minister Kishida. They joked at their recent meeting, President Biden said, you stole a page from my middle class economy with your new capitalism. And it's really true. The alignment economically and strategically, and the alliance has never been stronger, as Ambassador Green said earlier. Japan is a global power. It's the third largest economy. It's our closest ally in the Pacific. We're the first largest economy. They're the third largest economy. Of course, we have to be aligned economically, strategically, and in times like this with what's going on in the Ukraine. Goto-san, you mentioned that I'm new. I am new, been here a few months, just since late summer. I'm so proud to be the director of the Office of Japanese Affairs at the State Department. It's so great to be the highest level state official who focuses solely and exclusively on Japan. The power of this relationship knows no bounds, and our secretary has said that numerous times to his counterpart, Foreign Minister Hayashi. We can change the world together, which is an awesome thing to say, also a huge responsibility for the two of our countries. Especially strong leadership in the White House, at state, in the embassy with Rahm Emanuel, as Shikata-san mentioned, really make this a time when the two countries can make a huge difference in the world. The situation in the Ukraine only makes crystal clear the importance of our relationship with Japan. So the US-Japan alliance has served as the cornerstone of peace and prosperity. I like hearing that from Ambassador Green, not long out of the US government, the cornerstone of peace, security, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. That is our line, and that's the truth across the world for 6 decades. As President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida affirmed in their January 21st virtual meeting, the US and Japan alliance has never been more important or more necessary, was their words. Our shared view, really our complete alignment of free and open Indo-Pacific is critical to President Biden's vision of a more firmly anchored United States in the Indo-Pacific. So more firmly anchoring the United States in the Indo-Pacific is what he says, and also of strengthening the Indo-Pacific region in the process. So right now, our main goals are modernizing the security alliance, as was made clear in the 2+2 statement recently with our defense ministers and foreign ministers, to partner with Japan globally, not just bilaterally, on global priorities, to strengthen people-to-people ties, which have always been strong in the basis of our relationship, and most importantly for our conversation today, to advance economic security goals. On economic security, we're working together with Japan to combat the climate crisis, to strengthen supply chain resilience, of course, to end the pandemic and work to prevent future pandemics, to develop and maintain leadership in the digital economy, to stimulate economic growth and inclusive development. That's kind of the core of the new capitalism and the economy for the middle class, and to raise international standards for infrastructure development. I'm happy to answer questions on any of those if we have time later. We're also working to fight corruption and, of course, authoritarianism, and address socioeconomic inequality domestically and abroad. And I hope we get back to that inequality later, because that's a key to the new capitalism and the middle class economy. Prime Minister Kishida's new capitalism is remarkably similar, I've said that a few times, to President Biden's economy for the middle classes. Both leaders are signaling their intention to tackle some of the biggest issues facing our economies today. Economically, we're aligned in fundamental ways. That's why President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida agree on the importance of economic policies that are sustainable and inclusive and benefit the middle class. Last April, President Biden and Prime Minister Suga, former Prime Minister Suga, announced the Competitiveness and Resilience Partnership, the CORE partnership, where we pledged to revitalize our alliance and make, and this is key, practical commitments to fulfill its potential. So we're looking to ensure concrete deliverables and outcomes, not just talk. The core partnership's practical areas of cooperation include a lot of the same that I just mentioned: climate, digital innovation, space, supply chains, infrastructure, and more. One last thing I want to mention, and that's what we're calling EPIC. So on January 21st, when Prime Minister Kishida and President Biden met, they took a major step forward on the economic front to implement the core partnership by announcing this new ministerial level Economic Policy Consultative Committee. It's the Econ 2+2, and we're calling it EPIC, to track and drive economic cooperation and to strengthen the rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific region and the world. President Biden, in announcing the EPIC this year and the core partnership last year, has recognized the tremendous breadth and opportunities of the US-Japan Economic Alliance. Partnering with Japan at a high level on critical economic topics is pivotal to sustaining this free and open Indo-Pacific. We're very excited about EPIC, led by the State Department and the Department of Commerce. And so I hope that all of you tuning in today can help us focus and develop it. We need your help, we need the input, we need to use this platform. I very much welcome your comments and your vision on how to target EPIC in practical ways. Going on to what Shigata-san mentioned really quickly, EPIC will help us advance the new Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is central to implementing the prosperity pillar of the Indo-Pacific strategy released by the Biden-Harris administration on February 11th. Our Indo-Pacific strategy is looking to encourage innovation, strengthen economic competitiveness, produce high-paying jobs, rebuild supply chains, and expand economic opportunities, again, for the middle class families in the world in both regions. Deepening our economic ties with Japan and throughout the Indo-Pacific region is a business priority and also a strategic one for us. The United States will work with Japan and other partners through EPIC and the framework to define our shared objectives of a regional and world economy for the middle class. Finally, America's alliances are a greatest asset. The United States and Japan have stood side by side for 6 decades, and we look forward to expanding our cooperation this year and in the years to come as we work together to achieve global peace, security, and prosperity, most recently in the Ukraine. I look forward to our discussion of how the aligned economic vision of President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida can transform our region and the world. That's the challenge for the discussion. Let's see how we can transform. Thanks very much. Back to you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Monaghan. What a really strong start to this conversation. Again, you can send questions via email, asia@wilsoncenter.org. You can also reach us at Twitter @Asia Program. Let me turn to Yumiko Murakami, a general partner at Empowers Partners, Japan's first ESG-focused global venture capital fund, and one of 3 very powerful Japanese women to lead this venture capital fund. I hope that we can hear her views on whether the Kishida vision for new capitalism could advance Japan's commitment to environmental, social, and governance concerns, both within and outside of Japan's borders.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, I'm very honored to be part of this very important discussion tonight. I'm not sure about Goto-san's introduction about, being one of the most powerful women. That I'm not sure, but it's been certainly a pleasure to be on the council for Prime Minister Kishida to discuss new capitalism over the last 3 months or so. We have been having very, very interesting and lively discussions on this very important topic with the Prime Minister. So today, I thought maybe I would share some of the suggestions, ideas that are more concrete, something that we can touch in terms of what US and Japan can do in the context of sustainable capitalism discussion. And there are several areas where I can certainly envision very clear benefits if US and Japan work very closely. And the first one that's very clear to me in terms of what we can do between these two countries is definitely zero carbon or climate change. And more specifically in the context of rulemaking, whether it's about ESG investment standards, which is something that I am very heavily involved in terms of ESG investments in Japan. This really means accounting and information disclosure discussions, which have been driven mainly by the EU up until this point, or perhaps funding issues for developing countries when it comes to climate adaptation. Which is a very contentious issue. But if US and Japan can collaborate strategically on these issues, I believe we can potentially expect very meaningful and impactful outcome in these negotiations. And as I mentioned, the EU has played a very critical role shaping these rules and treaties. And this is certainly not a competition, as climate change is a global agenda, but because it's such an important global agenda, I believe collaboration between Japan and the US will be important to advance this agenda on a global basis, in particular in the Asian region. And we can do so by basically sharing the driver's seat and drive the bus and set rules and treaties and regulations. So in the context of ESG rulemaking, I think the timing is really important right now because it is taking place as we speak. So I think in this juncture, it's extremely important that US and Japan can really share our compare notes and really figure out how we can be more impactful or influential in terms of shaping these rules. And this leads to the second area of collaboration. Technology is definitely the key to find innovative solutions for climate change and also public health as we are coming out of the pandemic crisis. Hopefully, we still have quite a few cases in Japan, so we're still dealing with the pandemic on a daily basis in Japan, as many other Asian countries. And both US and Japan have very advanced technologies in these areas, which can be potentially complementary to each other. and apply to address some of the most pressing needs for the global economy or global society. And U.S. Japan have a very long history in both public and private sectors to collaborate in the areas of research and development. For myself, I can say I spent quite a bit of time at universities in America after getting my first education, and vice versa. We have quite a few U.S. researchers and students in Japan as well. In the private sector, as I said, there are a number of collaborative research projects. So that's all good, but I would say at this juncture, it makes a lot of sense for both countries to zero in on the fields of climate and health and promote technology-driven innovations together. And it will require adjustments, harmonization, and collaboration between the two countries in terms of, for example, data privacy issues. But both countries do share the same basic philosophy when it comes to what democracy, should be, is all about. We shared, economic values, and that's important, especially in the context of Asia region, where China has taken a quite different approach on these issues. So I do think this is a really area for opportunity for both countries. And the third area is Asia, as we just mentioned. I just mentioned China. What I haven't mentioned in terms of collaboration in rulemaking, in green investments or green business, or collaboration in advancing technology-driven innovations in climate and health, this is exactly what Japan and the U.S. should be able to do together really, really well in this region. And climate change is a top priority for the upcoming G7 in Germany, G20 in Indonesia later this year. I'm sure there will be a lot of focus on climate and health, especially energy policies that not only for the Indonesian government, but that is definitely top priority for all countries in Asia, as well as G20 countries. And at the G7 in Japan next year, I'm very, very sure these will be very high on the agenda as well. So timing wise, it just does make a lot of sense for two countries to strengthen the ties between these two leaders and really promote this agenda to help countries in the Asian region together. And as I said earlier, China has similar, actually, I should say, not similar, it's the same interest. They are very, very interested in these areas, the areas that I just mentioned. They have a very different approach. They have a very different philosophy. And I do think this, as I said, timing is really important because discussions are now really becoming more Asian-driven, just, for a number of different reasons. But again, we have seen the discussions around the nuclear power generation in Europe. So you can just see, even within EU, there are different views, right? So I think this is a time for us to really step up and say, ESG is for all. Climate change solutions for all, rulemakings for all. And it's important that EU has taken a very strong leadership, and I hope they will continue to do so. But it's equally important that voices from other regions, from Asia, from the US, will be part of the decision-making process. And I think this is really interesting and also exciting time for US and Japan for that reason to be in sync and really collaborate in these areas. So that's about it. Let's have more discussion on this.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for really highlighting specifics about the shared economic values between the United States and Japan, but also some of the challenges that the two countries will be facing moving forward. Last but not least, I'd like to turn to Charles Freeman, who really doesn't need an introduction to those of us in Washington, of course, but also in Tokyo. He is the Senior Vice President for Asia with the US Chamber of Commerce. I'm hoping that he might be able to address some of the issues about how US corporations have been responding to the Kishida government's economic roadmap, and what are the prospects for new capital, new investments and partnerships that could emerge as a result.
Well, thank you very much, Shihoko, and let me make 3 quick points. for the discussion. First, I want to touch on new capitalism and what it means and to business. Then talk a little bit about some of the structural opportunities for collaboration between the United States and Japan in the Indo-Pacific context, and then lastly, talk about some more specific private sector opportunities for collaboration. First, to the issue of new capitalism, I think from the U.S. private sector and the Japanese private sector as well, there's a lot of questions about what it actually means, and the efforts at looking at capitalism and saying, well, there are certain market failures with respect to the environment, whether diversity and inclusion issues, and equity issues, the income inequality and the like, and to the extent that new capitalism is designed to address those market failures, I think the big question for us is how much government wants to jump in and set the direction in ways that actually restrict private sector activity. And I think at the end of the day, all of these discussions, whether it's Build Back Better or new capitalism, ultimately require the private sector to be the driver of economic growth. So it's important, I think, that as we look at addressing some of these market failures, that we don't forget that the first rule should be don't unnecessarily hamper growth in the name of equity. And I think Murakami-san raised China and its different approaches. I worry a little bit that because of China's successes, that the United States and Japan and other democratic market-oriented countries are learning the wrong lessons from China and actually seeking, rather than shore up our existing economies and address narrowly the challenges that we face surgically. The idea is to actually copy China and to have more state-driven capitalism, which I think would be an enormous mistake. If you look at the individual market failures that new capitalism is attempting to address, again, environmental issues, inclusivity issues, and income inequality, a lot of these issues ultimately come down to the market failing to price the costs in the case of environmental degradation, in the case of inclusivity, the failure to bring in to your workforce the largest talent pool possible, and in the case of income inequality, failing to make sure that you are compensating people throughout society in ways that not only give people the living wage they need, but also give them the confidence in the system, and that it is not designed to disadvantage individuals. So I think all of those things can be effectively priced. Murakami-san talked about ESG. It's very important, that we actually do figure out how to effectively price the cost of environmental degradation or support, and I think it's a very important development. So I think the private sector is excited to work with both the U.S. and Japanese governments on these initiatives, but we do have that one plea that don't forget that at the end of the day, governments expect us to do a lot of the implementation. Talking about a little bit about the structural issues, whether I agree completely with Shikata-san that the United States should rejoin TPP or CPTPP. That clearly exiting TPP was an enormous strategic as well as economic blunder. So returning to TPP would be in our view would be the best way of achieving a genuinely effective Indo-Pacific economic framework. But given political realities in the United States around and the politics of trade, understand completely the Biden administration's desire to come up with an economic framework that doesn't require the U.S. Congress to vote in favor of a trade agreement. That opens the question, though, if you don't have a framework which is binding because it's a matter of because the decisions that are made have the force of law, then it's going to be that much more difficult to put in place meaningful economic outcomes. And further, without market access concessions, it's also a little bit difficult for us in the business community to see exactly what the attractiveness for the Indo-Pacific economic framework would be for countries to sign on if they're not getting some tangible market access opening concessions from the United States. But we're certainly interested and enthusiastic about working with the Biden administration on its Indo-Pacific economic framework, and look forward to achieving the best possible outcome, despite the obvious restrictions on or limitations of the current approach. Finally, in terms of the opportunities for private sector collaboration, there are many, and as was raised here by Ambassador Green and others, the supply chain resiliency concern, the new issue of concern about political risk of over-reliance on China as a hub in the supply chain. These are all reasons for the private sectors of the two countries to get together and rethink some of the economic activity that we do together in light of actual the newfound risks that are involved. So there is a lot of activity going on between our two private sectors that looks at supply chain resiliency. There are structural problems to greater collaboration between our private sectors. Japan has done a remarkable and really successful job at investing in the United States and creating not just economic opportunities here for our workers and companies and communities, but being quite successful in terms of delivering value to shareholders in Japan. But despite the fact that the United States, for example, is the largest investor in Japan, Japan's stock of foreign direct investment, given the size of its economy, is shockingly low. And the goal, I think, for the United States and Japan now is to figure out ways that Japan can be more open to foreign direct investment from the United States or anywhere. And there are cultural impediments to doing that. There are some legal impediments to doing that. But I do think that achieving a better environment in Japan to receive FDI and deploy it in the interests of Prime Minister Kishida's new capitalism program would make tremendous sense to us. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Thanks so much for your comments and some tough love for both the United States and Japan when it comes to economic opportunities. I think that we've actually received quite a few questions, but as the moderator, if I can actually ask the first one, we've talked a great deal about shared economic values and common economic objectives. I'm actually thinking of some specific areas that Japan really excels at. And Japan has really led the way in promoting quality infrastructure development across the world. And clearly, there's demand in Southeast Asia, as well as in Latin America, Africa, not just for more Japanese investments, but also Japanese technology, investing in human capital to ensure sustainable growth. How does the infrastructure investment strategy, as well as development assistance outlook, fit into the Kishida administration's broader economic roadmap? And this is really a question for Shikata-san.
Well, thank you very much. Murakami-san talked about climate and energy-related issues, and this could be the area where there could emerge a very active collaboration between the United States and Japan. We wish to ensure sustainable economic growth with energy security in the Asian region. And PM Kishida is trying to establish an Asian zero emission community that will take the lead in decarbonization technology standards and international quality infrastructure development with other Asian countries. Unless we address the challenges facing mega cities in ASEAN or India, we will not be able to address climate change challenges. So we'll be engaging with an initiative called Asia Energy Transition Initiative. There is newly established Asia CCUS network, carbon capture, utilization, storage to support ASEAN countries. And we will be making best use of joint crediting mechanism, JCM, to transfer the experience, know-how of domestic cities in building decarbonized cities to developing countries in Asia. So, of course, this involves the need for quality infrastructure, and this is the area where there would be joint venture between the United States and the Japanese companies. We don't intend to, as governments, excessively intervene into the private sector activities. The aim is to just create environments for more investments, including American investment for Japan. And there's already a program called JUSEP, Japan-U.S. Clean Energy Partnership. And if we could deploy these activities to the rest of Indo-Pacific region, that would be great. And just let me give two examples. There is an organization called PICTA, Pacific International Center for High Technology Research in Hawaii. And Japan's OIST, Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, have been engaging between themselves for deployment of clean technologies, clean energy technologies, including to South Pacific island nations. So this is one example. And another example is under the Kishida administration, there is more interest in the US technology of small modular reactor, SMR, and nuclear fusion. And the Japanese company IHI has invested in Oregon's new scale power. And there is a potential for Japan-U.S. collaboration in this. And very lastly, we have already seen the initiatives of carbon neutral port in LA, Long Beach port. And this is, again, the efforts to introduce hydrogen truck with an American company called Kenworth. And we are seeing emerging collaboration. And this kind of solutions could also be used to other Indo-Pacific region. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I make a comment on the same question because I
Please.
that's exactly what I wanted to say. So long time ago, when Japan started to really promote quality infrastructure, especially in Asia, it really wasn't called ESG investments. ESG discussions have been driven, like I said, by many European countries. Initially, now a lot of companies, Japan and the US and other countries are involved. But years ago, Japan was already doing it. It wasn't called ESG investment. And I think it's really interesting how quality infrastructure approach was a very different approach that China was taking in terms of their Belt and Road infrastructure approach. And I think what's kind of interesting is now, as I said earlier, the rulemaking in terms of ESG standards and information disclosure and so on and so forth, that's actually that's moving very fast. I actually think that once we have a better framework in terms of investment, ESG-driven investment, actually there is going to be better appreciation and understanding in terms of what Japan has been doing with quality infrastructure approach for a number of years. It's just that the framework is going to be better understood when we have a sort of global standard that any countries can look at and say, okay, this is how we measure, assess any investments. And so I think it's really timing-wise a really interesting time for us to really embrace this global discussion in terms of how ESG framework is being discussed, and really continue to push forward this quality infrastructure approach that Japan has been working on for a long time. But I think there is going to be a different level of understanding and appreciation by many countries, but in particular in Asia.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Let me turn now to the question about trade, and looking at trade from a political perspective as much as an economic incentive. We've heard CPTPP mentioned a few times already today. And one of the biggest challenges for CPTPP moving forward is going to be that of expansion. Unfortunately, as Charles said, it seems unlikely that the United States is going to be joining the CPTPP anytime soon. But at the same time, we know that this is a trade, and trade deals become a glue that brings a lot of disparate countries in the region together for a common objective. As the biggest economy in the CPTPP, Japan is playing a key role in handling new requests to join the deal. The UK, China, Taiwan, and South Korea have already made official bids. And is there any way for the United States to support Japan in this endeavor to deal with the very politically sensitive issues regarding accession without actually being part of the CPTPP?
that one for me? So thank you for asking that very important question. The first thing I can say is that the US is present and accounted for in the world and in the Indo-Pacific on the economic front. We are engaging in every way with Japan. We understand very clearly what it means when China applies for the CPTPP. We've heard from Japan and other countries how important it is to maintain the rules-based economic order in the Indo-Pacific and in the world, and we understand that absolutely. We're engaging in every possible way to do all the things we've been talking about all day, ensure the free and open Indo-Pacific, to counter the malign influences in the region and those who would change the status quo in the region, specifically, for example, on quality infrastructure development. We're working very closely with Japan on rules for transparency in lending practices. That's very important, and Japan has been a champion of making sure that China and other countries don't sign agreements with developing countries that are not transparent and that dig them into debt or other undesirable effects for the world. We're engaged now with, as I mentioned, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and our new EPIC. These are platforms where we can talk about all of the issues. There will be lots of engagement by Commerce and USTR in the IPEF, and also Commerce is co-leading the EPIC. This is an opportunity for all of you to weigh in and help us use the tools that we do have, and acknowledging what we don't have right now with TPPP, but thinking about what other things we can do on the digital front, of course, on the climate front with climate and energy, and we are engaging. We have GSEP and GSEP and so many US, Japan, and other international fora. We're about to chair APEC coming up, so there are things we can do there. Lots of opportunities. I'd like to throw out one more question for Charles too. I'd really like to understand more about what he's saying about pricing the value of environment and diversity and inequality, because we would love to make it market driven and make it work for the companies. That's exactly what the new capitalism is, right? And the economy for the middle class. I think it's a much longer discussion. We probably need a couple hours. So maybe we'll continue offline, but I'd love to hear more about that. Let's think together. One thing I'll just add by saying that US and Japan are completely aligned on what's needed in the region and on supporting the private sector innovation, especially with regard to environment, as Murakami-san said. Let's do it. Back to you.
Great, thank you. Why don't I first turn to Shikata-san, who's had his hand up, and then turn to Charles to answer Ms. Monaghan's question. Shikata-san.
Yes, on TPP, let me just briefly mention, that China has been so active in trying to have access to CPTPP, and also there is a framework called DEPA, Digital Economic Partnership Agreement, Singapore, New Zealand, among others. And while the United States is not coming back to TPP, China is trying to be more influential in the region. And this will have huge impacts on Japanese business, also on American business. So, and we have seen China's resorting to economic coercion. Other TPP participants like Australia and Canada, we are like-minded, and we don't have any intention of lowering those TPP standards for China. But of course, China is a big player. And it's a similar situation in terms of BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. China is coming up with digital BRI and trying to export smart cities to ASEAN countries. And my case is it is essential for Japan and the United States to collaborate on standards and I talked about, Ambassador Emmanuel. He wrote an excellent book called The Nation City, Why Mayors Are Now Running the World. And this could be a subnational cooperation between American and Japanese cities and could be deployed to the rest of Asian countries. And I should say that, Smart City project is being promoted in the city of Las Vegas by NTT. And so there is already ongoing efforts along these lines. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Charles, if I can turn to you to address some of Ms. Monaghan's questions.
Thanks, Shihoko. And Catherine, you're right, it's a long conversation. But briefly, what I'm suggesting is that there are certain goods that everybody wants, public goods that everybody wants or should want. We want clean air. We want clean water. We want to make sure that there is equity among genders and races and other diverse groups, and we want better income equality. But if you look at those as things that have not traditionally had a cost associated with them, then you look at the work that Murakami-san is doing and the ESG movement generally. There's an effort there for consumers and investors to actually vote with their money and their feet in favor of companies that actually do provide some of those public goods in a better way. So, or in a more clear way. So I think there is the market is correcting for some of these issues, and it's very important that government continues to push them, because it does send the important signals to the marketplace. But there are market solutions embedded in all of the challenges that we face in these areas, in my view.
Thank you. And I think, as Ambassador Green said in opening this discussion, both Japan and the United States have faced challenges in dealing with some of the domestic economic issues, and they can actually work together, or not necessarily work together, but certainly outline some of the issues that they have, and perhaps come up with best practices and share information about what can be done to address some of the issues that you addressed. We only have 2 minutes until we have to close this conversation. And I know we've already covered a lot of topics, but one question I have is from Chelsea Wells, who asks if the current U.S.-Japan alliance has any plans specifically regarding cybersecurity and increasing the resiliency of transmission technology, such as satellites, undersea cables, and 5G. We've touched upon 5G, but I think undersea cables, satellites, these are issues that really do require cross-border cooperation. I'm wondering if someone could succinctly answer that in a minute or two.
Goto-san, shall I just briefly comment on this? So there is ongoing collaboration between the Japanese government and the US government, also under this US-Japan Competitiveness and Resilience Partnership, core partnership. And we are trying to promote joint research and development of the key technologies, emerging technologies, including beyond 5G, but also there are issues like how we could protect, secure the submarine cable across the Pacific. And we are working together between Japan and the United States in the areas near, for example, Micronesia. And Australia also comes on board for such collaboration. And this is part of our economic statecraft and economic security discussion taking place in Japan.
Well, thank you so much. I'm afraid the time has come for us to go our separate ways. I know that we've only touched upon the many topics that we could address in this very broad subject of, really dealing with shared economic values and prospects for cooperation. I hope that we can continue this discussion in the future. Certainly, the Wilson Center would be eager to host similar opportunities as this. But before we log off, I would really like to thank our speakers, Noriyuki Shikata, Yumiko Murakami, Catherine Monaghan, Charles Freeman. Thank you for logging in today, and I hope we will gather again, hopefully in person as well, someday soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.